Everything is here to stay, and it's always now. It's always now. There never was a used to be. Everything is here with me, and it's always now.
All right, welcome. Thank you, John. That was lovely. We have a great day today. The weather is cooperating. Beautiful day in Austin, Texas, and let's go around the horn. John, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. You know, I've switched my unit of analysis from the individual. I've decided that if you don't think you like mass, try a ventilator.
Got it.
Ventilator. But I've switched it to institutional responses and to leadership. You know, I do lectures on leadership, and I was watching the leadership of different organizations, whether it was religious, and I've looked at the Big Ten, where, you know, go Northwestern, where I went to graduate school. And don't you find it's pretty interesting that we've gone and looking at the virus and how people are demanding that leaders go forward. So we have a conflict here in the science of the virus with the popular opinion of the virus, and a great case study is my old alma mater, Northwestern, in the Big Ten. So they had decided not to play sports. There was so much demand, and you can see the other thing in whether it's religious organizations or whether it's opening up, say opening. So we've gone away sort of from leadership, that is the people that's supposed to make the decisions, to almost a popular takeover of decisions itself. So I think from an analytical point of view, I find that very, very interesting. If you look at the rest of the world, I think that, again, stock market is booming because there's nowhere else to put money, to say the least. And then the other thing that's happening is nobody's talking about the interplay of putting kids back into school and the schools really acting as a daycare center. So I think there's a lot going on. And then we have, of course, the political atmosphere. That's always interesting. They say it's bad, but it's always bad. You know,
you're ready to go at it, John. You just, you know, you're plowing through our stages here. So, Llewelyn, how are you today? Good?
I'm very well, thank you.
And how's the weather up there?
The weather is cool and beautiful. Really
excellent, fantastic. Al Berkeley, how are you, sir?
I'm fine. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland, and we also have beautiful weather.
But Baltimore, Maryland, and are you glad that football is back?
I do like football, and I worry about the virus, obviously, but it's fun to watch the games.
Yeah. Well, before I get going here, let one introduce you, and you know, our audience keeps jumping on, and hopefully we'll have a robust audience today. But Alfred Berkeley is the chairman of Princeton Capital Management, but that's chairman of GenTag. Love to know what that is. Board member of RealPage and Security First. And before all that, he was a board director of the World Economic Forum USA, also XBRL International, also XBRL US, as well as Edgar Online and WebEx, which is a company owned by Cisco. And he is a former trustee of Johns Hopkins University, and he's also a former vice chairman and president of NASDAQ and governor of NASD. He was also a managing director of Alex Brown and Sons. Chairman Berkeley was at the Air Force for about 6.5 years. He attained the rank of major. So we have to remember, and I know that John Butler likes that because he's a Vietnam vet. And then in terms of education, Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania and University of Virginia. So Al Berkeley, we're glad to have you.
It is.
Thank you.
It sounds like Tiger Woods being introduced before a golf tournament, and all the golf tournaments he's won.
I have one of these totally unstructured, unplanned lives. I've been so lucky in life. And if you want to know about Gentag, I'll tell you about it. It's a patent company that owns the basic patents on sensors talking to cell phones using Bluetooth or near field communications. It's quite an interesting company at this particular moment.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we'll back and let me see where we are this week, guys. So it's been quite a week. Lots of going on. Fortunately, things are trending down on COVID, both on the death toll and on the new cases. And I saw there was a big debate in Texas finally recounting things. It's fascinating that they were doing COVID case counts based on averages instead of the actual numbers. They finally changed to the actual numbers. So there'll be a small spike going forward, but it's going to trend down dramatically. So things are not as bad as they seem. And in terms of the back to school, clearly the leagues are back. Football is back. You probably saw the news that the Big Ten decided to resume the season out of the blue. Hopefully the Pac-12 will do the same, and we'll have a real national championship trophy in January timeframe. And the stock market in there, nothing dramatic. It's up 147 points on the Dow, 61 points on the NYSE. Nasdaq slightly down 20 points, no big deal. Probably the largest software IPO ever, a company called Snowflake, went out today at 120 and it's trading in the 260 range. Superb team is the reason that they're saying that that's the case. The team that is taking the company public has done 3 IPOs before, or something like that. Crude oil, it's hanging in there. No change from last week, 36.70 cents on the WTI price. So again, airlines, I guess, are not flying enough. People are not driving enough. So consumption is remaining somewhat flat. And the price of gas in the greater Austin, 8 cents up slightly at 172, which is fantastic, below $2. And then the other thing to say is that we got confirmation from Yelp that they went back to all their businesses. They have issued a report, about 8 weeks ago when things started out happening, that 53% of their businesses were having trouble. They were registered with them, and they have confirmed now that actually 60% of the businesses they were registered with them are not renewing their registration because they have all gone bankrupt. Primarily, small retail and restaurants alike. So Al Berkeley, what's your take on what's happening with COVID, the economy, the recovery in Baltimore, and your view and perspective as a global citizen?
Well, I think that the answer is testing, and I think that we've really messed it up by not getting the testing available. I think we're on the lip of some very serious high volume, low cost tests becoming available, and they will change the game. I was talking to a man the other day that's got a tunable laser test that give you an answer in 10 seconds and cost less than $1.
Wow.
So that could go in front of a football stadium, or it could go in front of an airline check-in, or it could go in front of a school door and change the game because you go right away.
Right. What's your take on the how things are managing?
How we're managing the COVID crisis?
The economy in general, how do you see the opening up of the economy? How do you see all that?
Yeah, I think the Federal Reserve is doing exactly the right thing. I think we need to understand and be very tough-minded and very cynical about the fact that we have pumped enormous liquidity into this market. And as you said in the introduction, the stock markets and the financial markets are one of the few places you can put anything. So I think that the game is not as healthy as it appears to be because we're absorbing all this excess liquidity into the measurable indices. If we were putting all that liquidity into something you couldn't measure quite so precisely to 4, 5, 6 decimal point precision in a spreadsheet, you'd be talking about things a different way.
Yeah. John Butler?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you look at, as you're right, we have different ways to measure the economy. We have the stock market, which is the economy of credit and money, and then we have the economy of real services. But I think you're right. I think that going through this crisis, the measurement, that is the numbers, will change. And I like the way you said, if you were to put this stuff on a spreadsheet, then you would be looking at it in a completely different way. But on the other hand, we're also in a time of what I call the projection of prosperity. And the question is, how do we get through this thing on the one hand, and at the same time projecting prosperity? So one of the measures that we have, as Andreas we've talked about, is the number of restaurants that's been closed, but that's just one measurement. So what this has told us is that where you work and what you do really can have an effect on how much you should save, and really how much you should save to really go through the next 2 years. So what we've talked about here, Al, a lot is the fact that the gig economy, we probably need to put some safeguards under the gig economy. And when you look at things like football, bringing it back, you got to feel sorry for places like, well, I don't feel sorry for places like Tuscaloosa, Alabama, because I went to undergraduate school at LSU. But you really have to feel sorry for the one town, football schools, whether it's Texas A&M or Penn State is, because there's absolutely it's all dead. The economy there is dead. So looking at everything and looking at the economy, I would say we are in a situation where we're in bad shape, but we have to project an interesting future. It's kind of like, Alan, when I was in Vietnam, we used to wake up and say, what a great day to die, but things are going to get better. I think you remember that, right? So the economy is now sitting on what I would call different kind of measurements, but they're measurements that are not solid. We would never teach this in a finance class. We never teach these kinds of measurements, but we have to look to the economy as prosperity while there is questions of prosperity.
Yeah, Llewelyn?
Well, I take some issue with this whole idea that things are really not that bad, because I think we're facing a double-barreled threat going forward. The first one is, although you're able every week to somehow say that the COVID news is better, the actual fatalities are going up, now standing over 194,000 dead Americans, which is an enormous number of deaths to come from one source. I say double barrel because first off, we are expecting, and Fauci, who seems to be the most reliable person in the administration, says we can expect a surge in the fall, and that seems to be very logical because we're not going to be able to dine outdoors. More people are gathering. We've got sports coming back and other gatherings, and they lead to more infections. But the other barrel that America is facing, really clear and present danger, can be said to be the weather, climate change. We have the West burning in the most extraordinary way. We have serial hurricanes hitting the Gulf Coast, particularly at the moment as we're recording this. Rain is pouring down. Some places there will be 30 inches of rain. We have tremendous and dramatic melting in the Antarctic. We have melting in the Arctic, all of which are going to impact climate. And we're going to see, we've seen in San Francisco temperatures going as high as 120 degrees, cool San Francisco. So that the new administration, whatever it is, that is elected in November and takes office in January, will have to get serious about climate. We'll have to, if we don't have a vaccine by then, we'll have to get even more serious about pursuing a vaccine and how it's going to be delivered. These are not times for totally happy talk. There are too many things overhanging. It seems to me we are camping under the volcano, and it is not by any means extinct.
Al, what do you think about listening to these two guys' perspectives?
Well, I was looking at testing as a key because I think that is one of the things that we failed to do. I also think that we've shown a lack of self-discipline and understanding as a population. Other nations in the world have taken to face masks, for example, taken to social distancing on their own without debating it as an ideological point of contention. So I think, we have nobody to blame but ourselves on this, and it's not entirely the administration's fault. It has to do with a lot of people not protecting the other man, the other woman.
Yeah. Our culture, yeah. I'm a Latin guy. You probably can tell that, and I can tell you that south of the border, it's a nightmare because the Latinos don't know how to not to touch, kiss, hug, grandma, and everybody all day long. And this whole can't touch you, that is totally anti-culture, and it's just not working. And so that's why you see the cases in Spain and Italy going through the roof, because it's the same thing. They just keep touching each other, It's just like culture,
But
right?
the answers are there. The answers, there are enough countries in the world that are controlling this thing to show the way.
No, I totally agree. Well, all I'm saying to you is that I concur with the fact that it's everyone's man's and woman's fault and on their own based on their behavior and their culture. And the Japanese and the Asians are very good at this social distancing. They never shake hands, So exactly. So I think that it's kind of fascinating what we're going through. But let me try to connect the dots and bring you into the conversation as it relates to your phenomenal career and what you're doing now. As we look at digital transformation and what's happening, we keep talking over and over since day one that COVID has nothing but accelerated digitalization and digital transformation in a phenomenal way. Some places 5 years, in some places 10, 20 years. And it should be no surprise, given the pandemic chaos that is going on, that a company like Snowflake, which is a pure play cloud platform competitor of Amazon and Salesforce and Microsoft and the like, it's had a rocket success on its IPO because again, it's the premier platform for a digital world, and so clearly there's something that we track a lot out called the telecom and 5G phenomenon. And, real quick, just from last week, right? Nokia adds a blockbuster industry 4.0 content a la Netflix style for private 5G. So basically, as I have said many times, 5G is really not about us tweeting each other. We already have 4G for that. 5G is about the fact that every enterprise in the world is going to be able to build their own private network to control their 10 billion things that they want to manage. And so Nokia has just, again, made another big inroad into product line that enables that. The 5G hotspot uses, Verizon just launched and AT&T just launched a new 5G hotspot use, so you can actually buy a 5G kind of hockey puck type product for $500, plug it in your house. You're getting 1 gigabit per second into that, 1,000 megabits, and now you can turn it into a Wi-Fi hotspot, and you don't need Time Warner cable and nobody else anymore. I mean, it's a game changer, right? It's available right now, $500. Ericsson has just released results from the headquarters in Plano, Texas. They are attaining 5.4 gigabits per second. So that's 5,400 megabits per second speeds on that hockey puck. So again, phenomenal progress in acceleration of new technology going on. SK Telecom out of Korea with Samsung and Hewlett Packard and Intel just partner into the whole notion of network virtualization for 5G. Again, another technology element that enables basically the segmentation of 5G networks and proliferation of private networks being built by anybody and anybody. And then last but not least, the U.S. government administration, just through the DOE, just basically decided to pump $1 billion into homegrown, U.S.-made artificial intelligence, 5G, and quantum research dollars to be won in the next 12 months. $1 billion. So Al, what's going on? I know that COVID is slow, but it seems like the world is going super fast.
Well, it's really interesting to talk about 5G because we've looked at it at Princeton Capital from the question of how do you play this and when, and what do you play first, what do you play second. We've divided the game into 3 stages. There's sort of the infrastructure stage where you're getting the towers up and the hockey pucks out there and the fiber optics that are needed, the backhaul issues, et cetera. Then you've got a middle stage where you're putting a lot of functional middleware into the system. And then you've got the applications coming in at 5G levels. And it's not just a 4G application sort of hyped up. It's a rewritten 5G application. It takes advantage of things that weren't available before. So we've tried to divide the world into this phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 to give ourselves some structure in how we think about it. Because even a professional investor can get awfully confused with all the change going on so quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
May I ask? Oh,
Go ahead. Go
Let
ahead,
me
John.
ask you a question on the application side and the speed, the 0 times speed time. And my question is, given that things are moving so fast, and I'm an investor myself, things are moving so fast, and you begin to look at what to invest in. So my question is, given the fact that $1 billion has been done for research, the question is, which of that research will be commercialized? That is, if you look at what happens, we spend $1 billion for a research process, but then the VCs, the angel networks, and other investors will really take that to market. So in all of the great funding for the application for 5G and for all of the Internet of Things 5G, how do you see the investment that will really make 5G the real game changer as we go through all of the clutter?
Well, I think one of the advantages we have in the United States is the ability to start companies fairly easily, there's an ease of entry. There are capital constraints in many places, but we don't have this sort of class structure that many places in the world have to decide who can be an entrepreneur and who can't. In our country, you can dream and you can be. So that's a good place to start. And it leads to a Darwinian survival of the fittest as these companies come to market. And often it's not the best technology that wins, it's the best total implementation fitting into the infrastructure that's been there before so that you don't have any big bang transitions. You have lots of small transitions. I think that the real issue on the financial side is an understanding that awareness has become one of the driving factors. So you see these unicorn model, a handful of companies that are supported with massive marketing capability, massive awareness creation. There's a fellow in Switzerland named Roland Schatz who runs a company called Media Tenor. I used to be on their board. They measure the awareness threshold in different industries. If you don't get yourself above that threshold, you're never even considered. You don't get into the final 3, the final 5 bake-off. So the idea of being known in an era when the next communication is 0 cost and instantaneous, unbounded by geography, is a whole new game that most people just haven't gotten their heads around yet. And what you're seeing with the unicorn investors and the venture business and some of the private equity investors is an understanding that awareness is about 9/10 of the puzzle right now, because people are fighting new ideas, they're finding new ideas, and they don't know anything about them. So the guy who shouts the most seems to be credible.
Right.
Thank you.
Llewelyn?
Well, I'd like to ask you, is there a point where there is a kind of saturation of technologies in that area, in the area of 5G? We've seen saturation at other times in other technologies. I think of the Concorde as being an interesting example. People wanted better airplanes, but did they really want to go at Mach 2.3? And apparently not, because there'd been no great move to develop a new supersonic airliner. It was of very little utility to a few people. I thought it was a wonderful machine and I was fortunate enough to fly on it, but I wonder at what point you find yourself with great technology and no customer. I've been in the energy business for over 50 years, writing about it, publishing about it, broadcasting about it. And we get all kinds of wonderful devices that could work, would work, might work. But there's a point where if there is no customer, there is no purpose. Utilities, for example, are showing scant interest in the new small modular reactors. Without the customer, the technology is rather doomed. Is there a saturation where people say, enough, we don't want to go any further, therefore we're not going to patronize or buy your product?
Well, there's a well-developed group of thoughts around this issue. Before Clay Christensen died, he was working on a follow-up, really, to the disruptive technology ideas with the jobs to be done idea. What do you hire that milkshake to do? What do you hire that car to do? What do you hire that pencil to do? And it's a different way of looking at things. And you're exactly right, Llewelyn, that you can get yourself in a situation where you've invested in a product that nobody wants to buy because you didn't understand the job that people wanted that new product to do. Or put it the other way, you didn't understand what's underserved and unserved in people's needs, and you went to someplace that they didn't care about. I think.
Sorry,
Well,
is it not part of the challenge of innovation? You can't do market research for something that doesn't exist, and you don't know if there's going to be a market there until, in fact, you develop some sort of product.
Well, look at the situation we're in now with encryption and cybersecurity. We've got over 2,000 cybersecurity companies out there. People are totally confused about what the differences are. It's a very intellectual game to understand what a cybersecurity product does and how it does it anyway. And you get into the situation where people just give up and they go to the ones that they hear the most about. There's a social proof kind of model there, to use Cialdini's model. So what I've been trying to do is say, is there a nuclear approach to cyber? In other words, can you eliminate the risk instead of mitigate the risk? What can you do in designing the product to eliminate the risk of it being hacked, as opposed to just watching till you are hacked and then trying to mitigate? And, just personally, I've looked at 3 companies that I think have a shot at getting there. One of them is a company called Cyber Reliant in Annapolis. One of them is a company called Vibe, which is virtual identity-based encryption. And one of them is a company called Agile PQ. And they're taking very small footprints of cyber, changing the model a little bit, and making it available for Internet of Things sorts of implementations where there are going to be trillions of endpoints. So, again, the tendency is to go with the one you hear most about, but they're not doing the job I want it to do, which is to eliminate that cyber risk, not just to mitigate it.
So that's a marketing challenge, isn't it? Peter Marisi, the newspaper writer, he says that he calls it the Caruso effect, where if once there were thousands of people singing opera, when Caruso was able to do it on recordings, everybody wanted to listen to Caruso, and that was many fine tenors went to the wall, and that happens all the time. This is part of the business picture.
Well, I find it interesting that, as you say, in America, we put up a stop sign after the accident happens. And so the question is, how do you put up the stop sign? I was involved with the Wheel Group that we sold to Cisco, which was one of the earlier kind of cyber kind of companies. So my question is, don't you think, though, that given the technology, that security will always be becoming? Don't you think that we will have robots that sort of we have now? And maybe what we need to do is to make sure, instead of putting the stop sign up right away, make sure that the stop sign is always looking and lurking, if you will. So the concept is to have that airplane, to have that technology, to have that system where the security is always in the becoming, they're actually roaming around, because you're exactly right. Big theoretical question is, how do we put the stop sign up before the accident happens? But in America, we always put the stop sign up after it happens. So how can we do that with cyber?
Well, you know, it's the fundamental problem in getting cybersecurity right is that Moore's law continues to give you more powerful chips under that code all the time. So every 18 months you're rewriting your cyber to take advantage of technologies that you didn't know were there before, but which can be used against you in the cyber war if you don't take advantage of them. So there's not. It's like a treadmill. You're rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. So we've been looking for architectures that were scalable, and also were perversely teeny little footprints. So I'm very, Adi Shamir, who was in the SNRSA, is an Israeli cyber scientist who invented identity-based encryption. Very, very clever when chips were smaller. There have been 17 or 18 patented improvements on top of it. And identity-based encryption may be one of the answers to answering this dilemma of an absolutely smaller footprint for one end and a huge chip on the other end.
Yeah. Theoretically, it's sort of like Clay Christensen, whom I consider Schumpeter. I think they're the same thing. But, I mean, if you look at Schumpeter, if you look at what Clay was doing and how we think about the world, well, then there's creative destruction, if you will, within the cyberspace that's happening all the time. So the question is, how do you continually rebuild yourself? So the purpose of capital, of course, in the Schumpeter model, is to make sure that you have enough capital to survive all of this destruction that's going on. Okay, I'm sorry, Andre.
No, that's great. Any follow-ups on that? No. Okay. Well, give me a moment here to share my screen, and I gotta pause and do our quick advertisement for. Hopefully you're seeing that. So we had our virtual Digital 360 Summit, which was a total success. And these three gentlemen were part of that. Al Berkeley was in the new financial tools panel, which was phenomenal. And those videos are coming up soon, and they'll be posted for folks to enjoy. So we had a great success there. And really enjoy the opportunity of being with all these companies and speakers from all these companies, and it was phenomenal. And we announced that our 2021 edition will be May 18th, 19th, and 20th, and we'll just do a redo, and we'll sprinkle some cayenne pepper and some brown sugar and other things on top of what we did last year, and shake it up and see what we get. But I can tell you that it was phenomenal success. We had 900 people register, roughly 600 people attended. It's the feedback has been glorious. So we are working on the follow-ups right now with everybody, and making sure that the speakers in the panels will be able to enjoy, have perhaps some participation in how we roll out the 28 videos and the 11 white papers that we're going to post from what transpired. Anyway, and then I want to thank Texas State University for sponsoring our Digital-Roundtable. So let me come back and basically pick up where we left off on something that enhances what we're discussing, which is what's going on in cities on this acceleration, right? So transition to EVs could save $72 billion in health costs, according to the American Lung Association. This got reported yesterday. I think that's an interesting unintended consequence. I've said all along, time now, that if we could only do one thing, would be to replace half of the vehicles from gas to electric, and all our problems will be solved. I'm excited to see that it's sharing with some findings and research with hard numbers about how we would save a ton of money if EVs are successful. Another element that we're looking at here is that Los Angeles just decided to create a new type of streetlight architecture. Basically they're looking at the streetlight, and the vendors that are in the streetlight business are looking at streetlights as the next iPhone. Streetlights are everywhere. In Los Angeles, they have roughly 200,000 streetlights in their city, and they're replacing them with a new architecture, and they're going to have everything from 5G cell to video cameras and everything in between, all kinds of capabilities and smart technologies. And at the same time, which I find fascinating, the city of San Diego, which actually deployed their smart street lights actually 2 years ago, have decided to shut them down because the street lights, when were given the management of the street lights was given to the police department, and the city of San Diego, or a faction of the city of San Diego, is basically vitriol about the fact that the cops are managing the street lights and potentially Big Brother tracking everything. So as we move forward, Al, with 5G and sensors everywhere, and technology in the sense of AI, and you see street lights being deployed and some people are rolling them back. And what's your take on how would the United States, the land of the free, the home of the brave, the independent person that doesn't want to carry, doesn't want to have an ID to vote yet, he needs an ID to get a driver's license. How is this going to work out?
Well, we certainly haven't solved a set of trade-offs between group security and individual freedom. I had the privilege of serving on one of the advisory boards after some of the Snowden breaks occurred. Mm-hmm. And this is the issue. The issue is where and when, and when is an important part of this, where and when do you trade personal freedom mm-hmm. for group security? And I can tell you that density matters, population density matters in that decision. This whole gun argument goes one way if you're in a crowded city like Baltimore, and it goes another way if you're in Wyoming riding your horse. Mm-hmm. So we don't have easy answers for this, and democracy at the state level is probably where this is going to get decided, because you've got such virulent feelings from the high density states and the low density states in opposite directions.
Yeah. John, Llewelyn, anybody?
Well, you know, a great proposition.
Hi, John.
A great proposition is that there's safety in numbers. Of course, that's a great sociological proposition, but when we look at it, it's not absolutely true. Also, of course, one of the things about democracy is giving up playing basketball or football, is giving up your individual, what you want to do individual for the good of the group. So I think on the one hand, you're going to have the legal stuff to come about, but then on the other hand, we all know that in the context of a democracy, we must give up some of our individual wishes for the will of the group. I want to comment, Andreas, on the EV stuff, and ask Al and Llewelyn about the switching costs. So we know that EVs are coming. We know all of these things are coming. And my question is, will it be as fast as the cell phone with the switching costs? So we're in this quagmire, I think, that we've always had great technologies. You know, we had electric cars in the 1919s, and also we had the great red cars in LA in the 1920s that really solved the problem of the movement of people. So I would want to get asked take on switching cars and putting these new technologies in, from EVs to lights, Internet of Things. Will we be delaying the switching costs? Because we know that the electric industry, for example, the utility industry, they move not like creative destruction, but they move every 20 years just to move.
Well, I think that we need to go look back in history. We got together as a nation to build through a community effort to build the railroads, and gave away an awful lot of land in the railroad right-of-ways. I think you're going to see the same thing coming in with electric recharging capabilities, and that's going to be the bottleneck, is where can I take my car depends on where I can get it recharged. So I think you're going to see a reckoning between the community approach and the free enterprise approach to who gets to bear the costs and when and how long for development of refueling capabilities with electricity.
Yeah, and it's good. Hold on, Llewelyn. It's good, just to make that point, it's good that you bring that up, because New York, California have the public utility commissions, public service commissions in both states have authorized massive deployment to the incumbent utilities, the IOUs, the Southern California Edisons, the consolidated Edisons of the world, in the tunes of $700 billion. So it's a significant investment that is coming.
Well, look at the dilemma that the entrenched centralized utilities have as we add solar to rooftops. The question is, who gets to get a return on capital there, and how much and when? We're asking the utilities to be there when we need them with baseload capability, and yet we'd all like to be free of the grid and not pay that electric bill. That's a fundamental dilemma that gets at this individualism versus community security again and again and again.
Yeah.
I think that transition cost is something that mostly the market will take care of, because the electric car is so appealing in so many ways, and as the range improves, it will be pretty irresistible. We did not ask what the transition cost was to introduce air conditioning after the Second World War, and it was a huge impact. It actually caused us to have to vastly increase the supply of electricity. Electric utilities in that period were growing at 7.5% a year, doubling in 10 years. We had a huge deployment of a new technology, air conditioning. It wasn't that new, but it was suddenly available to everyone. You could put a unit in a window, and people did. The appeal of electric cars, with their lack of fueling, with their lack of going to the gas station every few thousand miles to have the oil change, and the acceleration, plus just the general sense of being with it. I think it's a huge marketing factor, and demand is going to bring about charging, and there are going to be various models. I'm not sure it's the responsibility or desirable that electric utilities should be in the charging business. I think that parking lots should be in the charging business, possibly municipalities. We have all these parking meters. They should really quite logically be charging stations, and we're going to have quite a lot, an amazing amount of land available at shopping centers, former shopping centers, many, many places where cars come to rest. And wherever cars come to rest, there should be relatively easily available charging. I don't think it's a big order. I think the market will take care of it. There is a tendency when you get a great new invention to worry about what collateral development will be needed for it to work. But it's not necessary. The market will provide the collateral development. If the Wright brothers, I've said this before, had started worrying about radar and radio and high tensile alloys, etc., we'd never have had an aviation industry. They worried about flying, and that all the collateral developments take place without any regard to how that would be. And I think that is true of major thrusting new technologies. If a technology is strong and thrusts into the market, all the things needed to enable it will happen. And I think this is going to happen, and that we should relax about it. I don't think we need a lot of public money, whether it's through rates or whether it's through taxes, to bring about this change. It's going to happen, and it's going to make a lot of money for a lot of people in the course of its happening.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Good point.
Al, I'm curious about something. We seem to, over the last 20 years, have acceleration where we were totally a geopolitical world, and we still are in many ways, but the whole notion of a corporate world, and clearly we have that in America with the fact that a corporation has the same rights of a human being, that a corporate world would dominate with globalization and so on. And now globalization is getting chipped at it. What's your take as it relates to capital markets and innovation? Where are we in our journey? Where are we going back, or are we moving forward, or are we skipping? Are we jumping something? What's the shift that is in front of us?
Well, I think it's a normal perturbation in a growth curve. I think that we have not worked out the balance between who seizes the rents, the economic rents of an improvement when you saw China come into the market in beginning in '89 with the wall coming down. You have to be careful what you wish for. I would not want to go back to where they were before, because I think the best route for mankind is to be totally dependent on each other around the world. And this issue of, can I be dependent on you and trust you, or do I have to provide everything for myself, is a fundamental argument of the globalization era. I think that if we were dealing with democracies all over the world, we would have a different dynamic to this. If we've got strong dictators and lots of people and lots of resources, that's a different factor than we've dealt with before, and we haven't quite figured it out.
Yeah. I want to ask you something to take us into my favorite topic, data. You led the transformation of data in NASDAQ. In what took place there, and perhaps, you know, in many ways, I'll make this statement. You and I have never talked about this, but I would argue, and I remember vividly, New York Stock Exchange holding tight to what NASDAQ was, and they hated it. And somehow the dominoes tumbled. Can you walk us through that and how we got to where we are?
Well, there are many threads to that story. We can spend the 2 or 3 days on it. But I think the critical decision was when NASDAQ and my team, everything at NASDAQ was a team leadership model. Mm-hmm. And we did lots of communications with our customer base. The team decided to let computers put orders in themselves. Mm-hmm. And you immediately began this winner-take-all model where the marginal cost of that particular part of the value chain went to zero. Mm-hmm. And when costs go to zero, you get changes you don't expect. Mm-hmm. And so New York made a huge mistake in trying to hold on to a single dealer's monopoly. And we were intellectually more appealing, particularly to the West Coast entrepreneurs and the tech industry entrepreneurs, right, in NASDAQ, by saying we would bring technology to the table and we'd bring competition to the table. And I can remember a wonderful session with Craig Barrett at Intel about how that had to be the better model than giving it to a monopolist. But I think the data question that you're asking is actually really important, because what happened was the SEC took notice, and Chris Cox was chairman of the SEC, and I got a call from Mike Halloran, who was his chief of staff, who said, could you come over and talk to us a little bit about how we get the EDGAR database, the database of all the public filings and the mutual fund filings, away from being a PDF file and into something that can be read by a machine. Mm-hmm. And we've been experimenting. Bill Gates had sent a team from Microsoft to ask NASDAQ to be a neutral party to demonstrate the capabilities of XBRL, Extensible Business Reporting Language. Now, for your audience who don't know, the structured languages that are coming out, and XBRL is one of the main ones on a world basis, carry with them the data you want, the number of $2 or whatever it is, but it also carries with it what it is, its revenued money, and where it came from and when it came from, and whatever else you want to use to describe that data. And what had happened is computers had gotten powerful enough and communication systems had gotten wide enough pipes that you could carry that extra data with you. And it transforms what you can do with data. So Chris Cox and his chief of staff, Mike Halloran, asked me if NASDAQ would help the transition at the SEC from essentially a PDF, shoot a picture of a file, to a data structured data architect that was machine readable. And I remember asking, in the chairman's office, I remember asking, well, how big do you think this volunteer pro bono thing you're asking me to do is? And the SEC staff said, well, we think there are about 5,000 data fields that will describe US GAAP. Well, we're at 19,000 and counting. The SEC, wow. And we had no concept of how complicated we'd made the accounting process. And essentially, you've got about 18 different industries, each with a different taxonomy. But what happened there is the US began down the path of using structured data and getting the efficiencies of standardized data, while the rest of the world began to race with that. We're now far behind, and we've got a competitive threat that most Americans aren't aware of. It's very much like the metric system versus our imperial system. We think everything's in inches and feet. We're only 5% of the world's population. Most of the world goes in meters, centimeters, and kilometers.
Yep.
So we raise our costs and become less competitive when we have to do two systems to be an international company, or when we only do one and the rest of the world can't buy it. So there's this subtle competition that's going on to standardize data. The Netherlands run their whole country on structured data, specifically XBRL. The UK, Company House, all these companies that got checks with the COVID in England just got a check in the mail because they had been every private company and every public company has to file with a structured vocabulary that allowed the government to know who the workers were, when they were there, and exactly how much they'd made. And so they didn't have to apply for PPP the way we did here. They just got the check. And those are efficiencies that have real value to them. Go on and on, but this data standardization issue in solar, it will give solar industry the way to get paid on a power purchase agreement model over a 10 or 15 year time frame in a way that if you didn't have that standard data coming off those solar installations, you couldn't do.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting to note that in terms of an academician like me who does stuff on what I call social physics, is that it has blurred the distinction between different kinds of disciplines. So, for example, as in finance, when the physicists really took over writing the equations for finance, so really people look at the discipline of finance, and I'm a finance junkie. And, it's the physicists from Chicago, that other little school down from Northwestern where I went, that really came up with the idea of taking all of this data and transforming finance. Well, when you begin to talking about what you've done in transforming everything that's machine learnable, not just readable, but learnable. And to me, that is the major thing. Then you're going to see a lot of stop signs, right, that we can put in before things happen. And when it gets to the point of finance and what's happening at NASDAQ, it becomes very, very great because, like you said, I mean, the cost for buying a stock and the cost of doing anything just goes to zero. Or when that model goes to zero, then my gosh, all kinds of good things happen.
We can buy fractional shares now.
Yeah,
That's right.
Which is amazing. Right now, Al, and I'll let Llewelyn jump in here, but given that, I mean, we have lived that transformation in the financial system, but nothing else is like that, and everything else needs to become that. What's your take? I mean, how does that come about? How many Al Berkeleys do we need, and how does this happen?
Well, I think that you better be careful to not recognize that we're like frogs in a pot of water that's getting hotter and hotter because it's catching up with us. Look what Amazon's doing to retailing. It's right around you. Mm-hmm. The costs, the efficiencies of just not having to go get something and wait for 3 days to have it delivered and getting it tomorrow instantaneously and going about my work. Those are productivity savings that we're not measuring. But they're enormous. They're enormous.
Right. Llewelyn?
Well, I would like to, as a sort of final thing, first, I'd love to hear somebody say something about the climate, because when I turn on the television at 6:30 tonight to see the news, it's all going to be about the climate, and we're talking about data. So somehow these things have to come into some sort of conjunction in order to establish policy and the way forward for the nation. And the other thing is really related is, when does the physical intersect with the virtual? If we're really going to have the kind of catastrophe, which many envision from sea level rise, there's going to have to be a lot of physical building to protect the cities from the water. And that isn't a data issue. We can find out where should build by analyzing data, but at some point we have to mobilize skill, engineering basics, and an enormous amount of capital to defend the cities or to abandon the cities. These
Llewelyn, I think that Peter Drucker would disagree with you. It's really, data gives us the ability for, you don't like this word, for efficiency. So therefore it gives us the ability to have smart dams. It gives us the ability to know when the sea is coming. It gives us the ability to prepare.
Agreed, but you still at some point got to take a physical action.
Absolutely, and I think
But you can't just tell the girl you love her, you've got to kiss her eventually.
Right, but what I'm saying is it's gonna merge with the physical. So what you call in the physical might be smart. Now there would be, the notion between the physical and the non-physical is also blurring, right? So therefore the physical might be just as smart as, but you've got to build something. But as Peter Drucker would say, my gosh, so we got all of the things that can fit together, right, on the dam, so the dam won't break. So we got our butt kicked by the Japanese because of Peter Drucker's efficiency and the measurement of statistics. So Al, when you were a kid and we put together 55 Chevrolet, we down to Western Auto to get a part, every part was different. So can you imagine a situation then where every dam is efficient? What Llewelyn has said, what we build becomes more efficient because of the data.
Well, at Princeton Capital, we asked ourselves, how do we get smart enough on climate issues to have an opinion? I mean, we see it going on around us, but how do you get that down to investing? Right. We identified a company down in North Carolina called the Climate Service, I think is its name, that did something differently than the others. Everybody we talked to was measuring sea level rise, and that's interesting. These guys were measuring storm surge, which comes on top of sea level rise. And we thought that was much more interesting to us, and we've leaned on them for a few comments about things we were thinking about investing in.
I think it's part of the whole, sea level rise and surge. I mean, the one is on top of the other. You cannot ignore the surge on top of the rise.
Yeah. Well, the other thing we've done is we've got a portfolio that tracks the Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations instituted. They're a series of basically 169 points coming out of about 17 families of goals. And part of that, to get back to what we were talking about cities earlier, Andres, there's a Smart Cities initiative in the Sustainable Development Goals program, and we've been interested in that. We've got a portfolio that looks at companies that are publicly attesting to their commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. This is to be done by 2030, which looks awfully close when you talk about climate change issues and stuff like that. But I think, as Andre said, I was on the board of the World Economic Forum, and I think one of the things that's come out of the World Economic Forum, a fellow named Klaus Schwab runs it, is he's basically asked the world up its game. And part of the world is responding, and that's quite remarkable. And the UN picked up on that. Kofi Annan said we cannot let the Millennial Development Goals, which failed, just drift off. We've got to try again. Right. And I think that's, that's sort of human nature, is that we're going to end up trying again and trying again and trying again. And if we had some media that were a little more statesmanlike, we could get some persuasion going on a little faster.
Well, Al, let me chime in here and let me say, in my field, I do research on innovation, entrepreneurship, et cetera. Gary Caton here and I, we worked with a company in Silicon Valley and Austin, Texas, and we took business plan going backwards and predicted whether or not they'd be successful using AI. I would send you the research. We're writing the algorithm now, but unfortunately, they're fighting in the company. How that happens. But right now, I would send you. It was written up in the Austin Business Journal. We took data. We took companies and looked at it such that it coded everything, and we knew nothing about the company, and we were 100% in predicting what they did.
You should come work for our investment advisory firm.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. But they're fighting now in terms of the company. I will send it to you. But what we did was we did it with data, big data. Okay.
Yeah.
And we went away from the. In other words, I like to tell my MBA students that we're actually your management teams are more important than the technology. But actually, the management team might grow out of the technology now. I mean, the horse, et cetera. Yeah.
I think the data in the persuasion game, trying to get large numbers of human beings to do something like wear a mask or use less gas. In the persuasion game, there's emotion and reason, and I think the data feeds the reason, and builds the ironclad intellectual case, but you have to have fires on television or deaths, the cooler in New York with all the dead bodies in it. You got to have that emotional pull to get the world to move.
Right.
Yeah. So trying to wrap up our thoughts here. It's okay if we go over our time for a few moments, but you know my work on the power grid, and I came up with this thing called the smart grid a while back, and we have been building the smart grid sort of the old-fashioned way, with hammers and rubber bands and duct tapes and things, and then over the last 20 years, the technology has gotten a little better, and we have things now like distributed energy resource management systems and advanced distribution management systems and appliances that you can touch and talk and the like. But the grids, all the power grids now are still managed by 2 or 3 guys on 8-hour shifts, and they're not letting the machines make any decision. How do we power grid? What needs to happen for the power grid to go machine driven?
I've never thought about that. That's a really interesting problem. My guess is, and there's a little bit of irony here, I was the guy that got the call from some anonymous person when 3 Mile Island was overflowing, and they were worried about the water coming into the Susquehanna. I was on something called the Coastal Resources Advisory Committee, which is set up under the Coastal Resources Zone Act. And I got this anonymous call, and this guy said, there's a nuclear meltdown at 3 Mile Island. The water's rising. It's going to go into the Susquehanna. Click. And I called the state police, and I said, you don't know who I am, but I'm on the crack. And here's what this guy said. And I think we ought to pay attention, because not to pay attention could be disastrous, and paying attention costs almost nothing. And this very smart police officer, who was the desk officer at state police in Maryland, picked it up and went to work with it. But my point is that I think when on the control of the grid, I think when the control of the grid gets responding to more and more distributed production of energy, that those control mechanisms will have to change, because they'll be beyond the capability of a team of 3 people.
I know, but the challenge is that all these guys are holding the dike with their fingers, and they are not doing what NASDAQ did, which was let's do it. Let's make the machines make the decisions.
Yeah.
What needs to happen for that? A crisis?
Well, you've got some very advanced thinkers like the Southern Company and the Baltimore Gas and Electric and Exelon. Some of the Exelon pieces are very savvy guys, and they know these issues. They're not head in the sand ostriches at all.
Yeah. To me, it's just fascinating. To me, it's just fascinating that the financial services world and other, the airline industry, other industries are really 20, 30 years ahead. And then there is a significant number of industries, water, energy, oil and gas, on, that are like, 30 years behind. Right?
Oh, yeah. I think so. As I said before, it's amazing how disruption doesn't take place in the utility industry. It takes 20 years for it to happen. And remember, with a lot of things that we predict and make better, people are not involved. So the problem with financial modelers, for example, is that people will change their minds, but they're based on the equations of physics, and we have theories in physics that are lead pipe sense. So with physics, you're playing against the laws of nature.
Well, you've got the problem, the fundamental problem of financial derivatives coming from the derivative financial theories coming from supply and demand curves.
That's right.
Is a real problem. A
big problem.
Yeah, I could spend another hour on that.
Dude, we got to talk, Al. We got to talk.
Llewelyn, any final thoughts?
No, except I'm marvelous to be on with Al. Very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Johnny, you want to pick up that guitar and take us away? Al Berkeley, thank you for being with us. We will follow up with you. We got many things to discuss.
I've enjoyed this quite a bit. Thank you for having me.
Christmas cards you sent to me, all that I have are these, to remember you. memories that come at night. Take me to an early time, back to a happier day, when I call you mine. But we sure had a good time when we started way back when. Bedroom talks and morning walks, oh how I love you then.
All right.